안녕하세요, Cloud입니다. Hey guys, Cloud here. In this episode of Cloud's Korean podcast, I want to go over the topic of special needs when it comes to students or when it comes to learning in general and teaching specifically. I talked about it in my LinkedIn posts, the past couple of posts, but I wanted to talk in more detail about it here. Alright, let's get into it. I've taught a lot of students throughout my time, but I've only had a few that had some sort of learning disability or required some sort of special needs. I had one student that had ADHD. I've had more than one, but I'll talk about one specifically. I've also had students that weren't necessarily diagnosed with anything, but from their actions, they just never focused on anything. One student specifically, I'm going to call him H, he never focused on anything. He could focus maybe 5 seconds on something, and then he'd just want to do something else. And I'd always ask him, like, okay, what are you thinking now? And he'd always be thinking of a TV show or something that he read or playing with his friends. He never really could focus on the lesson that he was learning. Basically, I tried a lot of different things with him. What ended up working was, and this is different for each student, but this worked for a couple of my students. I'd basically time how long they could focus. I wouldn't tell them that I'm doing this, obviously. I would just time it, and then I'd say, okay, well, he focuses for about 5 seconds. So I'm going to try to get him to just focus for 10 seconds. And then I'll let him take like a quick 30-second break, and then I'll talk to him about whatever he wants to talk about, and then we'll go back to the lesson for another 10 seconds. And I tried doing that, and slowly I would increase the amount of time that he has to pay attention. I would tell him, hey, listen, H, if you can finish doing this one thing, which would take about 10 seconds, without getting distracted, it depends on the students. Some students like rewards, like buying them toys or something, or getting them candy. Actually, I didn't have a single student that wanted candy. Interesting. Other students wanted to just talk. Other students wanted to play with me ping pong because he had a ping pong table in his house. It would differ from student to student, but I would try to see what they like and try to go with that. I had a student who really liked Beyblade, and me playing with him Beyblade would always make his day. So I tell him, all right, if you can really just focus for these next 10 seconds, or if you can do this one problem, then at the end of the day, sometimes actually I would just end class early. I'd tell them, okay, if you can finish this much, we'll end class early. And it would kind of motivate them because they wanted to get out of class. And then slowly I would increase the amount of work that they have to do. And if they would ask or say, oh, this is too much or this is more than before, I'd say, well, you're better than before, aren't you? Well, if you're better, then you should be doing more. And I'd always explain things so that they understand, so that it's not me forcing them to do something they don't understand. Sometimes I know that they're not going to understand, but because I've already set the groundwork of them realizing that what I'm doing is for a purpose, I would tell them, they would ask, why am I doing this? And I'd say, because I said so. And then they would just have that trust in me that, okay, later on he's going to tell me why, which I always did. If I tell them because I said so, eventually I tell them, okay, now do you see why I made you do this? And then they'd be like, yeah, now I understand. So I would try to increase their attention span. And sometimes, or not sometimes, I'd always tell their parents that this is a problem, this is an issue. They would know that it's a problem. I tell them this is how I'm trying to fix it. And, these are the results I've had over the past 6 times I've met. So like 3 weeks. And this is what I plan on doing going forward. And if there's anything you guys can do to help, sometimes I'd give them recommendations. Some parents would help. Some parents would say they would help. I've only ever had one parent that actually helped. But a lot of parents, they help at the beginning when it comes to like their students' homework, their kids' homework, or actually most parents are good with homework. But when it comes to other things like, okay, the student isn't listening, or he's not paying attention, or he just has this problem, we need to work on it. Usually parents, they try for a little bit and then they just kind of stop trying. And then it's up to me to keep working on the issue. I feel like some parents think that because their kids are not deficient, but are slow or just don't have the attention span, that is just something that's there, and they don't necessarily try to work on it. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm the one that's working on it, but I'm glad that I gave them the opportunity. Obviously, I'm not talking about like kids that require medicine or have a medical diagnosis. That's above my pay grade. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about specific cases that I've encountered that I was able to work through it. So yeah, I slowly increased their attention span, and I try to get their parents to do the same thing. Another thing that I did that helped is I always befriended them, even when I didn't really like the student. I haven't had many students that I haven't liked, because usually I can form a connection with them and we can kind of click. But there were a couple students that I just didn't enjoy going to teach. And yeah, so I'd always befriend them. And what I found was that they would open up to me and they would actually enjoy my company. I had a student who really liked hanging out with me but did not like studying. To the point that he would love it when I come, but he would hate class. So I went on vacation for a few weeks, and then when I came back, I rang the doorbell, and he looked through the window, he saw me, he yelled, "No!" He ran upstairs and slammed the door and locked himself in his room, so his mom brought him out and let me in. And then he was totally fine. We had the class, he was having fun, he was completely okay, but he just didn't want to start having class. So I think befriending them always helps. That's another comment that I've heard, is that some students, they don't click with their teacher, and so they don't actually, if they don't have a bond, they don't care to listen. Even if they could listen, they just don't want to because they don't like the person. And I can understand that. If someone you don't like is saying stuff that you don't like, well, there's no reason for you to listen. If it's someone you like saying something you don't like, okay, well, maybe there's some sort of argument you can have. I've actually gotten students just because I click with them, and the parents recognized that I was good with the child, and they were like, "Hey, can you teach my son or my daughter?" And I'd say, "Sure, why not?" That's also because I'm a bit of a nerd, and I always talk about science and math and languages, even with kids, and I try to make them understand it. So that's partly on me as well. So I always befriend the student, regardless of whether they are slow or have some sort of learning disability. And I always answer non-related questions. One thing I see is that teachers try to always bring or stay focused or stay on topic. But sometimes it doesn't work with students who just, they can't focus like that. And you have to kind of wander around with their brain, just as they're wandering. The brain is wandering and they can't control it, so you have to go with the flow. I had one student ask me, "Hey, Cloud, what's mechatronics?" And I was like, "Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know a 10-year-old knows what mechatronics is," but I explained it to him. He didn't really understand, so the next class I brought an Arduino and I showed him some stuff, and he really enjoyed it. And another thing that I do is whenever I talk to them about an unrelated topic, I always find a way to relate it to their learning. Sorry about that. I always find a way to relate it to their learning. Whether I bring this up and be like, okay, so this is kind of like mechatronics, in which if you solve this problem this way, it leads to this or that. Or even when we talk about animals, they talk about what my favorite animal is, and I've made it a point that this type of problem is like an elephant because X, Y, Z, because I know elephant is their favorite animal, and they're just not going to forget it anymore. So I always answer non-related questions, and I try to relate the information that I get from them and their interests to what they're learning, because it just makes things click more. Even you and I, if we learn something that we're actually very interested in, we're going to learn very quickly, even if it's difficult. But we're going to learn much more quickly, and we're going to put in more effort than if it's learning, something we really don't care about, like something we just absolutely hate, or something we have no interest in. So I try to use that to my advantage. The just meaningless talk. Obviously, I always eventually bring it back to the lesson. The amount of time I spend not talking about the lesson varies from student to student, varies from day to day, varies from circumstance to circumstance. And it's basically a judgment call on whether I want to keep going or whether I want to bring it back to the lesson. If the student's on fire, I'm going to try to keep pushing them back to the lesson because they're understanding, they're solving all the problems correctly. If the student really isn't getting things, he's just really not in the mood, I might talk to him so that he actually like opens up and loosens up, and now he's back into the mood. It really depends. Another example that I talked about in my LinkedIn post is a student I had. We're going to call him M. He had ADHD and he couldn't focus on anything. Like, he had to keep moving the entire time. He couldn't sit still. So I did not know what to do with that student. Honestly, at first I felt like, not that I was robbing his parents, just I couldn't teach him. Like, he just wasn't learning. So instead of trying the same thing over and over again, I said, okay, let me just start trying different things. And I started indulging him in his conversations. And I found out a couple things that were concerning. I let his parents know, and they didn't know about it. All just from just talking to the kid. And their parents took care of it. And thankfully, nothing bad happened. I also learned that he really likes Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually. And once I learned that, I was like, okay, I can work with this. So I started making the lessons Pokemon themed. And I started making it, he knew like more Pokemon than I do. And I'm like 4 times his age. So, and I played the game since I was young. I played every single Pokemon game there is. So it was very interesting how much attention to detail he would put in the thing that he actually enjoyed. So I started making lessons Pokemon themed and teaching him, attaching meaning to each Pokemon, and he wouldn't forget that stuff. He didn't forget it even years after I stopped teaching him. I met him at a parking lot, and he'd still recall a lot of the stuff that I mentioned. Whereas the other times that I was teaching him and other teachers, he just doesn't remember anything. He just doesn't pay attention to anything. So obviously it was still a struggle, making the lessons Pokemon themed. It took a while for him to actually understand what I was doing, and even then sometimes he wouldn't he'd just start walking away or just try to go to his room or be like, okay, well now let's go do this. I always tried to do something physical with him. So I would act out some of the problems and I'd have him act it out because he always wants to move. I tried to cater to the student. The point I'm trying to make is that I'm not an expert when it comes to any of this, but from my personal experience, each student that had some sort of learning disability could not learn in the classical or the classical style of teaching that we use. But once I tweaked it up, sometimes just a little bit and sometimes a lot, once I tweak it for them specifically, for what they enjoy, for how they want to learn, and for just what interest they have, I was always able to teach that student. I haven't had a single student where I thought, okay, 100%, I can't teach the student. Sorry, parents. Sorry, Mrs. or Mr. XYZ. I can't teach the student. I haven't had a lot of experience with students who are medically diagnosed with some sort of learning disability, but I've had a lot of students that, he's not good at, or he's slow, but not medically diagnosed. Just the parents saying, sometimes apologetically, if that's a word. I think that's a word. Just saying, my student, he's not very good. Don't worry if he doesn't learn too much or if it takes a long time. And I find that no, that's not the case. You just haven't worked on it. You haven't put in the effort. If you can't shoot 3 pointers, it's not that, you just are incapable of shooting them. It's that you haven't practiced them. Some people it comes to them naturally and some people it doesn't. You have to find the way in which you can teach them. I always say this, just because he's not very good at learning or studying doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to learn or study. He does deserve it. And it's up to us teachers to find different ways on how to give them what they need or give them what they want. Because if we just judge every single animal in the animal kingdom on how well they, dig a hole, or how fast they swim, or how fast they climb a tree, well, if you put a fish and a monkey, the fish is never going to win in a tree climbing contest. So why are you judging them on the same thing? Why are you teaching them the same thing? Why are you expecting the same results? It makes no sense. Put each person in their environment, in their natural environment where they thrive, and they'll thrive. But if you take them out of their environment and expect them to thrive in a made-up construct that we've made, then it makes sense if they don't. And they shouldn't be punished. They shouldn't be yelled at. They shouldn't be looked down upon. We shouldn't apologize for what's going on. We should recognize what's going on and, improve, because that's how society has developed. If it wasn't for scientists constantly thinking about, nature and how things are how things work naturally, how things are supposed to flow, then we wouldn't have learned any of the stuff that we know now. We wouldn't have cars. We wouldn't have airplanes. We wouldn't have satellites. We wouldn't have any of this stuff. If Maxwell, if Einstein, if all these people didn't think the way that they did, if they just conformed to what already existed, if Einstein didn't spend years of his life going against literally everyone because of his theory, then we wouldn't know anything about gravity that we know now. We wouldn't have all these theories about, that Einstein came up with. Sorry, not to make this a nerdy podcast. It's a Korean podcast where I talk about teaching as well. But yeah, if it wasn't for his relativity theories, then who knows where we'd be now. But we're here because he thought that way. And not just Einstein. I mean, there's Planck, Maxwell. I mean, the list goes on and on. But we should also do that, where if we see a student who doesn't thrive in a situation, well, maybe it's because that's not his natural situation, and we're putting a fish in, and telling it to climb a tree. Maybe we should try to find out, what's his ocean like? What's the lake where he can swim in? Yeah, that's what I think. And a last point is, a lot of the times, kids that have some sort of learning difficulty shine so brightly in a different area. They're so good at a sport, or they run extremely fast. Like, they're really good at track, or when it comes to like video games, they're actually really good. It can be a bunch of things. They're really like smart in other areas, and just because they don't learn as well, or they don't have good grades, or you're trying to teach them mathematics and they just can't add numbers properly for some reason, why? Why? I call this the empty tile syndrome. It probably has an actual name. But I always give the example of entering into an office, and you look around and the office is extremely clean, but then you notice that one tile on the ceiling is missing, and you stare at that one tile, but you completely forgot that every single tile in that room is in the exact correct position, but you're only focusing on that one deficiency. That's just human nature. We always look at that one deficiency and we completely ignore everything else that's perfectly in place. Just because someone has struggles in learning doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to learn. And it's okay if he's struggling with it, because he has all these other things. He has a personality. He has all these other things. So we shouldn't focus on that one specific deficiency and just ignore everything else. Now, I'm not saying don't work on that deficiency and try to improve it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that sometimes we forget everything else. And students, and kids, a lot of times I teach kids, and, it's their self-esteem, their self-worth. They don't feel like they're worth it. Even though, they could be monsters in the field that they're in. They're just geniuses. But because, everyone else has good grades and I don't, all of a sudden, I'm not worth anything. I don't think it's fair for the kids. I don't think it's right for teachers to do that, for parents. I just, I sympathize. I have empathy for those kids. And I really think that we should really treat the next generation that's going to take the mantle from us when we're done, and that are going to carry us on our backs when we can't carry anymore. We need to treat them well. We need to treat them better than how we were treated. If we were treated improperly, we shouldn't say, this is old school, this is how it's supposed to be done. No, we should recognize that this was wrong, and we shouldn't want it for anyone else. And we should constantly improve for ourselves, for the future generations, and for, who knows, maybe one of those kids goes on to cure cancer, and someone you love ends up getting cancer and gets cured just because of that one kid. Who knows, life is long, and I think we should try to make it right. That's all I have to say for today. I'll see you guys in the next episode.